So we're here with Jeff Orr from ABI Research. So you do research, right?
Yes, market intelligence and industry analysis.
So we're here at the AMPART conference, the Freescale Technology Forum. And so what would you say is really big trend right now going on with the ARM?
Well, I think for this particular conference, one of the trends and the reason that I'm participating in this conference this week is the movement towards more consumer applications. Organizations such as Freescale have been developing semiconductor, DSP technologies, application processors for a lot of embedded solutions, whether it be industrial applications or automotive industry, for example. And a lot of that work is now applicable to the consumer market. We tend to think about consumers engaging with computers or smartphone handsets, but more and more we're now seeing consumer electronics devices, ones that don't have a traditional computing interface or a big, huge OS that you can extend in it. It's media tablets, e-readers, navigation devices, things that are interesting to the individual but don't necessarily have the roots as being a computer. So that makes it more interesting to see where companies like Freescale are taking that direction and using ARM architecture to be able to help address some of those market needs.
Because at ABI Research, you've published some forecasts where you basically kind of say that maybe the ARM-powered smartbooks are going to take over Intel and Microsoft. Are you saying something like that, or what are you saying?
Well, when looking at ultra-mobile devices, and I define that as anything that from a form factor that sits between the laptop and the smartphone. And there's a lot of ground in there, everything from netbooks to mids to ultra-mobile PCs, and now even media tablets like the iPad, as well as consumer electronics devices that are connected to cellular mobile broadband. Those devices become more important, and as their numbers tend to grow, they come from a fairly common set. If we look at netbooks historically, they've been x86 processors, they've been a Windows XP operating system, and quite a different behavior in the handsets. Where you have ARM-based architectures and you have Linux and mobile operating systems. So you tend not to find uniformity between those. And the ecosystems, meaning the companies that are providing the hardware, the software, the integration, and ultimately the brands that are coming to market with those devices are also quite separate. So I find it really interesting because the computing platforms and the handset platform ecosystems are really starting to collide, and it's creating a lot of new ideas. So when looking at architectures such as ARM or Linux operating systems, we have to go from where we've been, primarily almost 100% x86, for example, in netbooks, and now there's opportunities for non-x86 platforms. It's becoming more and more accepted by the users, by the channels, meaning like the retailers, the network operators, and that makes for a more interesting market, greater competition. Ultimately, the consumer wins.
So the prices might go down for laptops, right? Thanks to the alternative of ARM, kind of.
Well, certainly with netbooks, that's already started, and there really hasn't been an influence for the first couple years from ARM in the netbook space. The value message has really resonated with consumers, and some have suggested that maybe as the economy recovers, netbooks will just go away. And I don't think that's the case at all. I think that consumers, in general, like value, and they're now questioning if what they have in terms of processing power and the operating system and the size are good enough. And once they've established that value, netbooks probably aren't going away, definitely not going away. I should just be really clear on that. They're not going away. But perhaps they become the low end of the laptop type of offering, so the value price. At the same time, ultra-low voltage machines are coming in. They're continuing to push down the price, keeping longer battery life, good processing power. So I think you're just seeing more and more segmentation occurring, more choice for consumers. That starts in x86, but at the same time, the costs of ARM-based systems should be able to meet or perhaps even beat the types of solutions that can happen on x86. But we're still very early in seeing those actual systems come to market. Right now, there's both the clamshell netbook style machines that are coming and being introduced right now for existing markets where they're being used as companion devices like netbooks. And then there's also now new form factors, media tablets. and with interest, whether it be from companies that have been in this space for a little while, like Arcos, or whether it be Apple getting into the larger form factor kinds of systems with the iPad. There's going to be a lot more happening this year, and I think that makes it really exciting for people to see how they might be able to adopt these devices, whether it be in a traditional clamshell or whether it be more of a tablet form factor.
Nice. So even big companies like HP, Toshiba, Lenovo, they're all showing these ARM-powered laptops, and with maybe even ARM Cortex A9 coming up and all that.
Sure.
What do you think Intel is thinking right now?
Well, I think they certainly have a significant investment in the processor technology. There's no doubt about that. And it's very difficult just to take a moment in time and to try and say how the future will be determined based on that. It's just like watching the stock market. So past performance is not necessarily going to be a great indicator of how the future will be. I think the difference right now is that in the netbook space, it's coming from 100% x86 architecture, meaning Intel Atom processors and VIA as a licensee of x86. And it's now opening up. Where someone may have said, well, if it can't run a Windows operating system, I don't want anything to do with it. That type of mentality is decreasing. It doesn't mean that Windows goes away. It doesn't mean that x86 goes away. It just means that now there are more players who have different ideas, and they're trying to solve different problems. One of the things that I think people were surprised about when I would come out with predictions and talking about how in the future Intel won't have 100% of the market, Microsoft won't have 100% of the market, is they didn't consider that there are developing markets. We tend to think about Western Europe or North America or even certain Asian countries such as Japan or South Korea, and think that if we live in those countries, that just must be the rest of the world and the way the world operates. But it's not. Most netbooks in 2009 were shipped into Asia Pacific countries, and not necessarily just into Japan and South Korea. So that has a lot of influence based on people's previous experiences. And while the early adopter markets, again, the ones I mentioned, Western Europe, North America, Japan, South Korea, are primarily buying systems like netbooks as a companion device, the same reason that people are buying media tablets as a companion device. It's not the first PC in their home. That's really a smaller opportunity than those people who are still haven't had their first internet experience, that don't have a computer at home, haven't connected to the internet before, they don't use it at work. And so being able to say that someone is going to make a decision based on x86 or an Intel brand or a Microsoft brand OS because that's what they're familiar with and they want continuity of that experience has some falsehoods in the future, because there's a greater opportunity to introduce people to those systems and solutions for the first time. So I ask people to consider, don't just say that it has to be the way it's been the last 3, 5, or 10 years. There's so much that's changing that you can't just use those experiences to predict how things will change.
And it's going to be cool with the Chrome OS coming out, and they're targeting to work on both ARM and Intel. So basically, maybe the experience will be just as good on both, and people won't really care what's inside. They're just looking for price. Yeah,
it's a good observation. I think there's going to be the opportunities for the first home computer, which we have to consider that the living space of individual consumers is going to be getting smaller. Places where people don't have multi-room homes or multi-story homes. Their dwelling size and the time they spend there is going to be less. So they may not be as interested in a large form factor machine. The idea of the refrigerator PC being mounted on the front of it may be the kind of form factor that's going to come back, or something they can have in their general living area. The idea of a Chrome OS, one that's web-based, I really like to think of the idea of a web browser with hardware that's wrapped around it, where that web experience really is the centerpiece. While that potentially can provide a different experience than one has in learning an operating system and loading applications on it and so forth, I don't necessarily know that that's going to be the easiest path, because now we're talking about just exposing people to the web and saying, if you want to do email or word processing or social networking or whatever their motivations are to go out, that they're going to have some sort of consistent experience. So now we're talking about, is that a Google domain? Is that a Yahoo domain? It's going to be very country, regional, cultural specific. And I think that's going to complicate that idea of moving towards the web as the sole interface. Outside of that, there continue to be opportunities for changing the form factor, different size screens, things that are handheld, things that are either purpose-built for a particular function like navigation or reading digital content, where you don't need to have a really extensible operating system. You're not asking it to do anything and everything. You want it to do one task or a subset of tasks really, really well. And that's going to be also an area that newer markets will be able to latch onto first. Price can go down, but choice increases, and people will have more choice as to how they wish to integrate with the web, the internet, or their content.
And right now in the phone, Android, some reports, I'm not sure if yours have been saying that, some reports have been saying that Android is, overall, all the Android phones are maybe selling faster than iPhones already, or in the first 3 months of the year or something like that. And maybe the price of the Android phones are not even lower than the iPhone really so far. And what happens suddenly if there's competition and the phones are sold for $199 without any contracts and all that? Do you think it's just going to continue to completely take over the iPhone? What do you think?
It's really complex to just answer that, and here's the way it will go. I mean, even within just the phrasing of your question, there were a lot of what ifs in there, and there's a lot of country and regional behaviors. There's network operator influence. There's different handset programs. If we're talking about a Google Nexus One versus an HTC Android-based handset that's being branded just by HTC, for example. All of it, versus an iPhone versus S60 and so on. There's so many different permutations there. It's really hard to just look at one way and say, how is this going to work? So I think there's a lot. I think the bottom line right now is that there's a lot of, continue to use that word, choice. It's not a one-size-fits-all market. There's different previous experiences. So there's a lot of movement from consumers and subscribers in general that have had feature phones, that are buying their first smartphones. There are those who are moving from the first generation smartphone to second generation smartphone. So those behaviors, touch, QWERTY keyboard, sliders, different form factors, media integration. Look at how many people are using iPhones today as an MP3 player, right? Which is just one of the sub-functions, and it's not even the primary function of an iPhone. There's so many things you can do with those devices that there's a myriad of possibilities there. What we try and analyze is the impact that each of those technologies and also the regional variations. So the behavior of even being specific about an iPhone or an Android phone within the US market compared to a country in Western Europe or to Asia. There's not necessarily the same types of behaviors. People engage with those devices for different lengths of time. They do somewhat slightly different behaviors on them. And there's so many variables there. I don't necessarily want to pick on how one operating system is going to overcome the other, but we continue to look at those and report on the actual shipments and how it's progressing. And I think that's an important area to comment on, which is how does an industry analyst approach looking at all these different factors? A lot of it is conversation. We continue to talk with the component providers, those that are providing processors and memories and displays and industrial design, the ODMs that are creating some of those designs and trying to package the right ideas, the OEMs that are branding and ultimately bringing products to market, the network operators that have to match services up to them. Having that dialogue, building those relationships is really what enables us to be able to put information down on paper. And that obviously gets us up to the point of talking just about history. How did we get to where we are today? Going forward, we have to look at a lot of different factors, some things that are understood today and some things that are more nebulous, and try and give some likely outcomes. And so there typically is not just one answer. We don't look into a crystal ball and guess. It's based on information, and what we try and help the companies that we work with do, which represent all those different ecosystems, is to try and coordinate and make some sense as it applies to their business so they can make informed decisions. Some of those outcomes will work. Sometimes our recommendations are accepted. Sometimes they're not necessarily taken. They may say, well, we have a different vision. But it's over the course of time that it starts to show where we're successful and where we're not.
Some of your research forecasts that you publicly sent out, like a year before or something with the netbooks, you were straight on. You
Sure.
said something and it was exactly right.
Yeah, and of course we're talking about, we set some predictions for netbooks shipments in 2009, and we update our forecasts and publish some of the top level numbers, or perhaps more of the interesting numbers on a quarterly basis. And in 2009 we had predicted around 35 million netbooks would be shipped, and we were definitely on the higher side of what other analyst firms were considering or projecting. I mean, sometimes double even what they thought was going to happen. And over the course of the year, it did materialize, and we ended the year with 36.3 million netbooks shipped. And I want to be careful there. That's shipped from the manufacturers into their respective sales channels. That doesn't mean that many people actually bought those devices. But it's certainly a good feeling to set that kind of prediction and be able to see it through. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing. We don't want to just put out a number and stick with it because we want to be right. We want to adjust to how the market responds. And I think media tablets is a good example of that. You know, if we had gone back 6 months from now, our media tablet numbers and forecasts for this year are lower than what we think is going to actually happen. So we revised those numbers based on the changes in the market. And certainly Apple has had a certain amount of success with the iPad, but at the same time, there's a significant gap in competitors with the iPad today. So yes, our numbers are going to go up, but a lot of the assumptions we've made for this year are based on a more competitive market, more competitive in terms of choice, more brands to choose from, more devices that you can choose from at different price points and feature sets, but then also through channels, being able to go to your favorite retailer or e-commerce site, as well as being able to go to a network operator and have access to these types of devices. And a lot of that hasn't materialized.
The Google Android for tablets is not yet official.
Yeah, at this point, there's nothing that's been announced there, so it'll be interesting to see how that continues. You know, does that ultimately become just the Chrome OS strategy, and that's how it becomes packaged? Or, does Google decide to try and replicate what they've done with the Nexus 1 offering on a handset and make perhaps a larger form factor that would be homebound and allow for people to access their favorite content and perform tasks quickly on that kind of a device? Still to be seen. So there's a lot of potential growth there. But even though Apple's had their particular success with the iPad product and a subset of the world market so far, in 80 days, 3 million units, that's great, but that's still less than the number of e-readers that were shipped last year, and about a tenth of the number of netbooks that were shipped last year. So we got to keep it in check. It's still a luxury item. And I think media tablets will be that way for a number of years until price points come down and consumers understand why they want to have this device. And perhaps it doesn't become just a companion. Maybe it takes over some of the activities that people would have done on other platforms, like a handset or on a laptop.
Do you think voice over IP or 3G could be disruptive for the whole telecom industry? And
I think it already is. The question still remains, there's still a lack of coverage. Coming into 2010, less than half of the countries in the world had 3G licenses available. I think, again, we have to think about who has access to these technologies. Being inside of a technology market, we tend to think of everybody must have them because we've heard about them, or the first deployment. Some may think that LTE is already widely available, for example, as a 4G technology, and really there's only, we're still talking about TeliaSonera as the first deployment, and that was 8 months ago. So there's a lot of work that still has to be done to realize these technologies, and within 3G, I do believe that it provides value. It's not going to be for everyone. It's not going to replace your home networking connection and your home broadband connection today. But it could definitely provide some versatility and it provides an opportunity for service providers that only provide mobile broadband service over 3G to enter the home as a potential connection method and to augment the way that people have access to information on their computing devices and their home devices. So I think there's a lot of ways that 3G can help influence that. Coverage still remains an issue. Can't get in all places. Price remains an issue. Right now, flat monthly rate pricing is kind of the norm, but it's not going to work for all device types. It's not going to work for all users. And more in those developed telecom markets, you see multi-device users. So now we're talking about, I have my smartphone, I have my laptop, maybe I have a netbook, maybe I have a tablet, maybe I have an ebook reader, and they all want 3G connectivity. It sounds like a great revenue opportunity if you're a network operator, but the consumers are not saying, I want to have 3, 4, 5 subscriptions and bills to pay for. They want to be able to gain the benefit.
Just get a few more SIM cards.
Yeah, maybe a SIM card that can be matched across all my devices, so I get a consolidated bill, or I have pooled minutes, or I have, case of the e-readers. The ebook readers are very interesting, especially the ones that are 3G connected, the Amazon and Sony Reader and Barnes & Noble type devices that have 3G in them, because there really is no perceived service by the user. That makes it a really compelling solution, because they're not thinking that to use this I have to go have a relationship with a network operator and sign up for a bill and pay for something. They don't realize that when they download and pay for content, that transaction, a portion of those proceeds go back to the network operator for using their network as the transport. So being able to architect a service offering that really doesn't look like a service at all to the user is an interesting alternative, but it's maybe one of 6 or 8 different ways that network operators are looking at how to offer, how to package a service for these different devices, as we not only look at handsets or computing type devices, but consumer electronics devices more and more, and all these devices wanting to get on the net that are managed by, owned by one person.
It'd be cool if there was a $199 Android phone without any contracts, with included unlimited free Google Voice, because you just need a few kilobits per second. And maybe they will monetize with ads, or if that's not enough, then maybe they can sell 1 gig for $20 or whatever, and you use it for whatever you want, even Google Voice, VoIP usage. I'd like to see that.
Well, I think there's a lot of people like to see things that were little cost or no cost. I think one of the challenges that the mobile communications industry faces today is, in essence, a subset of markets. Not every market do you have subsidies for handsets and mobile subscriptions for the hardware, but it's something that the market's going to have to deal with. I mean, there is a belief that certain handsets should be free as long as you sign up for a service commitment. But that hardware, the ability to manufacture and to produce those devices, costs money. Someone has to be paid to provide that capability. Similarly, the service, being able to make or receive a phone call or initiate a data session and access information on the web, or have that voice over IP service, it requires infrastructure. Someone has to pay for all of those spectrum licenses and infrastructure to be able to connect them all together. So it's not free, but there certainly has been some expectation in certain markets that you can have that barter behavior of if you can get this device as part of a contract, and when that contract is up, you either are renewing that relationship and buying up again, or you are receiving your device unlocked and free to kind of take it where you want. I think right now we have a mismatch between services and hardware devices. Hardware device cadence right now for handsets is about 12 months, meaning every year a company like Apple, for example, or a RIM or Nokia are refreshing that product. So you as a subscriber, a device owner, about every 12 months they're looking to put a new device in your hand. The service side is looking for a longer commitment than that. So I kind of think of it almost like the hot dog or sausage and bun kind of dilemma. You buy a package of hot dogs and there's 8 of them, and you get a package of buns and there's 6. There's a mismatch. Something's requiring you to buy more perhaps than you'll need. And that is...
but they make a lot of money, these carriers, right? Do they need to make that much money?
Well, I think
In a
Who's it for
contract,
us to say that someone should or shouldn't make money?
Yeah.
I just think that's certainly part of their business plan is to make money and to profit from that, to make more than they spend. But it's very difficult to realize. Thinking about technology, and we're talking about handsets, and there's a constant investment in research and development to make those devices. The network operators don't have any less of a challenge where they're going from maybe 2G to 3G, and they have to build that network. They have to buy that or lease that spectrum. If we're saying you need to go from generation 1 UMTS up to HSPA, HSPA plus, or LTE, these are not someone flipping a switch or entering a command on a computer somewhere. It's a fair amount of work, and often called a forklift upgrade, meaning it's a lot of equipment that has to be
all over the country.
All over the country.
But still, they're making trillions of dollars of profits, no?
I don't know that they're making that kind of profit. I think you can certainly look at things like the average revenue per user, ARPU, and I don't see that kind of money being aggregated there. But I think the key is that to provide a nationwide service, something that people are going to have an excellent experience. They're not going to be thinking about, do I have coverage or where am I at? It's more about, can I accomplish the task that I want now? To do that, there's a lot of work that has to be built up over years, decades perhaps, to get coverage, to have performance, to have management, so that you do have a balance of users, that if you do have thousands of people coming into a conference like this, you want to be able to get all of them fair and equal access. Different ways that can be done, and certainly I think anybody that's in that supply chain, whether it be the hardware side or the software side or the services, they're all looking to be able to better their business and make money. So I think that's normal. We shouldn't expect anything else.
It's a fun time in the industry, lots of things happening and disruptions maybe, and it's going to be cool to see your next research forecasts.
Well, thanks. I think it is very interesting, and what I really like about this market is that it's constantly changing. It wouldn't be as interesting for me if we were talking about devices that, instead of getting just gray, you can now get black and white as different color choices. That's not as interesting as being able to say that, every 18 to 24 months there's a radically different idea or approach that's coming, and whether that can be device, the infrastructure, the services, the performance, creating more and more value for people and giving them the opportunity to be able to utilize technology as part of their daily life. That's really exciting, and I'm glad to be a part of it.
And it's cool with all these bloggers and fanboys. It's good to also have a real science and real research being published as well, where there's some balance. You want
to have that balance. I don't want people just to look at the research and just accept it or deny it as it's written. I want people to challenge it, because it does come down to experience and perspective. And even within a class of an audience, if my audience perhaps might be network operators for a particular topic or device manufacturers, and amongst them they'll all have different variations. So it's important that for me to succeed and for the market research industry to succeed, it has to be responsive to what the needs of the customer are. And if we put out information that's not relevant or that is consistently inaccurate or erroneous or didn't take into consideration the needs of those customers, then
send a comment.
Send a comment. We love it, and we enjoy the interaction with the customers, because we get to help them in furthering their business, and that's it's more than just writing and having that go away and go into the interweb. We want to be able to have that information persist, and then be able to come back years later and be able to say, we predicted these kinds of behaviors, and then of course there'll be those that we just entirely missed for whatever reason.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.